All right, man, peace. So Carmelo Anthony, the washed-up former star of the New York Knicks and the Denver Nuggets, who currently is languishing on the Oklahoma City Thunder, wearing them down and weighing them down like a heavy-ass book bag on the first day of school, has once again stayed on brand. He's decided that he's going to re-up with the OKC Thunder and take the money over an opportunity to sign with a championship contender, because that's truly all his career has ever been about. That being short-sighted, not being a macrocosmic thinker, and taking the quick money over the possibility of higher things if he was someone who thought on a higher level. And there are people like that you encounter in life. They just cannot see the forest through the trees. And that is Mr. Carmelo Anthony. I also think that he's finally starting to face the fact that he's never going to win a championship, and that he is going to have to deal with the notion of being a bench player. He's going to attempt to resist it initially. And what I also believe that he's secretly hoping is that Paul George leaves the OKC Thunder, and then he can take Paul George's starting spot. Of course, they're expecting to get back Andre Roberson. So that, to me, is what Carmelo's hoping for, that Paul George decides to leave and it puts OKC in the position where they have to start him. Well, anyway, they're going to talk about it, and I'm going to chime in.
Carmelo Anthony is staying put, and he is getting paid. He will remain with the Thunder after choosing not to terminate his contract. Now, by electing to do so, Anthony will earn $27.9 million in 2018-2019 to finish off the 5-year, $120 million contract he signed with the Knicks in 2014.
Yes, that's the contract that James Dolan made Phil Jackson sign Carmelo Anthony to, because Phil Jackson never liked Carmelo Anthony. He never wanted him there. And I think that when people look back at Phil Jackson's tenure with the New York Knicks, they're going to start to understand and accept that his tenure was nowhere near as bad as many overzealous, overly emotional New York Knicks superfans try to act like it was. You basically gave Phil Jackson some carrots and some celery and asked him to make you a 5-course dinner. Because Carmelo Anthony was never a superstar at any point in his career. At his very best, which was during the late 2000s with the Denver Nuggets, you could say that maybe he could have been a second banana on a championship team. But he was never going to lead anybody anywhere, because pretty much the only thing that he was ever good at was half-court offense. And as we can see, Carmelo has decided that he's going to troll many of his trolls. Because when you operate on a low level, you want to go back and forth with people, as opposed to understanding that, you know what, they might have a point. I'm in a position right now where I'm still considering myself a star, even though I'm not. And the reason why many of these trolls are being galvanized by Carmelo is because Carmelo has chosen to fight going to the bench. If he had been magnanimous, if he had showed some level of scope or understanding in regards to what's actually best for the team, which he has never shown at any point in his career, I believe that many of these fans of the OKC Thunder would have left him alone. So now he's decided that he's going to troll them back, because that's pretty much what his career has disintegrated to, just going back and forth with fans. He got into a little dust-up on Twitter a couple of months ago when I believe there was a Twitter troll who stated that Kyle Korver was more impactful than him, and he got upset by that. Carmelo right now is at the stage of his career where he's really in denial. He's having a hard time truly grasping that he's on the other side of the hill. And that will often happen with athletes in their early to mid-30s, when they still think that they can do what they've always done. I remember they made a huge deal about this hoodie Melo shit before last season, and he ended up coming into the season being terrible. And they're going to try to act as if it was because of the offense. That was part of it, because he had to play with Westbrook. But Westbrook was also supplying him with a lot of wide open mid-range jumpers that Carmelo Anthony was consistently bricking. And as anyone who lives in the New York area knows, and has watched Carmelo for the last 4 seasons when he was with the Knicks, this cat does not rebound well. He does not finish well at the basket. He's a very poor passer and a terrible defensive player. So when you acquire a player like him, you have to truly know what you're getting. Carmelo, to me, is like the equivalent of a used luxury car, that the purchaser is not fully aware of how used that car actually is. It looks nice on the outside. It has a good reputation and name recognition, but in regards to performance, it is lacking.
And Melo took to Twitter to address the haters. Oh, you mad, huh? Take a step back, evaluate what is important, and enjoy life. Hashtag stay Melo. Before we get into this, Stephen A., I know there's something you wanted to mention.
I want to make sure, Max, that we understand, because we were talking about LeBron James. Remember, he was pitched the first go-round. He was never, I'm saying the second go-round, he was never pitched in 2010. You know, so he was never pitched.
Well, he was going to go back home.
Exactly. So in other words, you know what, him not wanting to be pitched now is not foreign, but he was the news then. He's going to be the news now. But
what that really seems to mean, Stephen A. Smith, when you state that LeBron James was not pitched back in 2010, is that he already knew where he was going, and we know for a fact that LeBron James already knew where he was going in 2010. So if you're trying to synchronize this scenario with that scenario, you seem to be implying that he knows where he's going this time around as well.
But it did appear to be a spectacle at times in the past, but he was never pitched that first go-round. It was just Cleveland and Miami that he had spoken to.
All right. Max, Mel staying in OKC, addressing the haters. What does this say about Carmelo Anthony?
What it says is that he understands that he's never going to lead a team to a championship, and he never was going to do that. And him overrating himself and a lot of simple-minded fans assisting him in his delusion has truly cost him in his career. Because if he had greater self-awareness, he would have teamed up with LeBron James back in 2010, and he'd probably be a 2 or maybe even 3-time champion, because who knows, he may have been the difference in 2011 when LeBron James decided that he was going to take a severe step back in the finals against the Mavericks. Maybe Melo might have stepped up in a way that Chris Bosh couldn't.
That the New York Knicks finally won a Carmelo Anthony trade, because they lost that first one. Don't forget what Masai Ujiri was able to do in Denver. Had a crew 10 deep. The second unit was almost as good as the first unit.
And they never won a championship. So all that is bullshit.
First unit ran everyone out the gym and went like 27-4 over some stretch.
Yeah, they ran everyone out the gym, and they ran George Karl off the team.
Some stretch or something like that at home. That was without Carmelo Anthony. The Knicks started to go, they had a little resurgence, and they started to really go the wrong way with Carmelo. They trade him.
Even though I will say this, I agree with Max Kellerman that the Knicks should not have made that trade. But when neither team wins a championship or really makes a severe mark in the playoffs, I don't think that either team, quote-unquote, won the trade. I believe the Knicks gave up Gallinari, they gave up Raymond Felton, they gave up Chandler. They didn't give up anything that resulted in a pivotal change of power for either team.
Stephen A., they wound up with Cantor, McDermott, and a second-round pick. Cantor's about to opt out of a contract that'll pay him $18 million this year because he thinks he can do better. Cantor has positive value in the league. McDermott's making like $4 or $5 million. Whatever, it's fine. He can shoot. And they got a second-round pick. You would rather have that. Like right now, you think they're happy in OKC that Carmelo opted in? Why do you think he opted in? Because that's the best deal he's going to get is $27 million.
Let me say this. I'm not even sure if Carmelo Anthony could get half that if he put himself on the open market. Not for a team that was being run properly and had true championship aspirations. I don't even think that he can get half that. Half of $27.9 million is almost $14 million. Would a team right now sign a Carmelo Anthony at 33, almost 34 years old, who plays no defense, doesn't rebound, and can't pass in this modern era with the way that they play? Absolutely not. Not if you're being run well.
Carmelo Anthony, given his unwillingness to come off the bench, or the fact that he'd be disgruntled if he did, given the fact that he was a once great player, and not really his fault that the league...
I'm not sure if Carmelo Anthony was ever a great player. I would say that at one point, he was a great offensive player in the half court.
It changed from under his feet, but it did change, making the kind of player he is, a liability on defense, an iso ball scorer, much less valuable than he once was. Given all those things, his contract and his age, Stephen A., Carmelo, I think, is seen to basically have negative value right now. If you're saddled with him for $27 million for a year, that makes your prospects, I know people think, well, Paul George may sign now. I think it makes it less likely that Paul George stays.
Absolutely. And I think that is what Carmelo Anthony's hoping for, Max Kellerman. I think that Carmelo Anthony's hoping that him re-signing with the OKC Thunder causes Paul George to depart or assists him in making his decision to depart. And that will give Carmelo Anthony Paul George's starting position at the 3 spot.
So I think the Knicks won that trade just by getting out of the Carmelo Anthony business.
Absolutely.
You're right, absolutely. But I got something else I want to bring up about Melo. By the way, I don't know why I keep misspeaking. LeBron wasn't pitching. He wasn't pitched the second go round. He didn't go in any meetings in 2014, not 2010.
Yeah, but we understood we did that.
That's what you're
That's what I'm
saying,
saying. All right, now here's the deal. Melo. Max, none of that's on my mind. When I saw that quote from Carmelo Anthony, you know what I saw? Melo. World is mine. It's no big deal. And
No, Stephen A. Smith, keep it real. What you saw was a loser mentality. Carmelo Anthony has a loser mentality. Nothing against him. I'm not saying he does not want to win a championship, but he has a loser mentality. And every generation, there are players that truly believe within their heart that they want to win a championship, but they really don't. Back in the 90s, you had Charles Barkley and a lot of these other players who acted as if they truly wanted to win a championship, but they didn't put in the comprehensive work, the diligent work that it would have taken to win a championship. Go look back at those series in the mid-90s where Barkley was involved. Almost every series that they lost, it was because of a pivotal defensive miscommunication on the part of Charles Barkley on almost every big play in every big game. In Game 6 in 1993, Barkley was the one who allowed Scottie Pippen to drive right by him, which totally threw off the rotation of their defense and left John Paxson wide open. In 1997 against the Utah Jazz, it was Charles Barkley who did not show out on John Stockton and left him with a wide open three-pointer. It was always Barkley, and you'll see this with players who are great or borderline great. When they get to those moments, they always have those mental faux pas when it counts the most, and that's what separates the Jordans, the Kobes, the real champions in those pivotal moments. They tend not to have those mental faux pas like a Charles Barkley would, or other players who normally will come up short in big pivotal moments when it mattered the most. Even a Patrick Ewing, who missed that finger roll against the Indiana Pacers. It just happens to those guys, and it doesn't happen to champions.
Melo, I've known Melo for about 15 years. Got a lot of love for Melo. This is the problem with Carmelo Anthony. And that's why, and it's the perfect name, and his name is smooth as it is. It's also an indictment. Because no matter what happens, sun's gonna shine tomorrow. I'm a rich man. I got paid. That was the attitude that oozed out of him when you saw that statement. I'm not saying that's how you feel. I'm saying that's what you thought. Like, will y'all relax? It's just basketball.
Well, actually, Stephen A. Smith, what I thought was, this is a cat, Carmelo Anthony, who knows that he's no longer viewed as being a star, but he's being paid like a star. So he's basically rubbing it in the face of many of his detractors that, yes, I'm getting paid, you're not, I'm in Europe, you can't be, I'm doing me. I know that I can't play like I once did, but I'm still delusional enough to try to include my name in there with the LeBron Jameses and the D Wades, etc., because I was drafted in the same year as them. I know that I've never come close to winning a championship. Oh, well, it is what it is. I'm still not going to come off the bench because of who I am. Carmelo is the equivalent of that 45-year-old actress who still wants to play the sex pot in the movies.
And see, here's the problem. Some of Melo's best friends in the league. I mean, Melo to me is one of the best guys you could know. He's good people. And that's why it bothers me that I have to get at him like this. When you look at Melo.
Once again, Carmelo Anthony, one of the worst finishers at the rim in the NBA. If you're a Knicks fan or you live in the New York area and you got to watch him play with the Knicks for 4 seasons or 5 seasons, how many years he was with the Knicks, you saw that over and over again. He could beat his man to the cup, but he could not finish.
Some of your best friends in the league. We see CP3, and I know CP3, it was funny watching him and his family going up against Steph Curry and his family on
Yeah.
And Ayesha Curry was phenomenal in that final round. She was actually phenomenal that whole show.
It was hilarious with my boy Steve Harvey and all of that stuff. That was great. But CP3, you gotta get the stars out to find him, because when he lose, he ain't happy. There's something wrong with the world. That's the kind of attitude he has. And
Well, let me say this about CP3. That's also the reason why he tends to come up so small in pivotal moments in huge games. That's why he also tends to have those hamstring pulls and those muscle pulls and those bodily injuries because his anxiety level rises up so high that it starts to affect his physique. It starts to affect his actual body structure. It becomes much easier to tear and pull muscles or even to rupture ligaments when your stress levels are extremely high because your body becomes tight. And that's why I told a certain brother in the comments who got upset that I stated that Larry Bird was better than LeBron James. I stated, yes, not only that, but John Stockton was better than Chris Paul.
And you 6-foot guard, you don't play above the rim, you ain't 6'8", 240. Well, what physicality you have available to you? This dude is a pit bull, a future Hall of Famer, a competitor extraordinaire, which we witnessed throughout these playoffs. How he closed out Utah, how he performed against Steph Curry and Golden State, and all of that other stuff. Dwayne Wade's a 3-time champion, been in the NBA Finals 5 times, NBA Finals MVP. There are no question marks about him. And LeBron James, okay? LeBron James, 9 NBA Finals, 8 in a row, 3-6 record in the finals, 4-time league MVP.
Yes, modern day Jerry West, Wilt Chamberlain hybrid. That's what LeBron James is.
The problem is the same draft, take CP3 out of the equation. The same draft, LeBron, his resume. D Wade, 5th overall pick, his resume. Carmelo Anthony was number 3 in that draft. Bosh was number 4. Melo. 9 times you home in the first round. 4 times you missed the playoffs. 1 conference finals, 1 conference semifinals. You have never played in an NBA finals.
Well, you know what, Stephen A. Smith, not to make excuses for Carmelo, but Carmelo Anthony, in a way, is like the 2000s version of Len Bias without the drug overdose. Because if Joe Dumars had done what he was supposed to do and picked Carmelo Anthony to come play with the Detroit Pistons, he would have been on a championship team in his first season. And who knows, they may have been able to defeat the Spurs in 2005 because he would have fit in perfectly with that team. He would have been a young, exuberant, vivacious bull in the half court, able to provide a lot of much needed scoring for that Detroit Pistons team, who really should have beat the Spurs in 2005. Carmelo Anthony was 1 draft pick away from being a 2-time world champion in his first 2 years.
And that's the quote. See, that kind of stuff right there, you just can't do. And that's what I'm saying about Melo.
Well, you can do that when you have no sense of self-awareness, which Carmelo Anthony has none. I've been over this already in regards to that brother. He has no self-awareness whatsoever.
I know how much Melo cares. I know how much it means to him. But I also know that because he's Melo and because he's a rough rider and he wants to put off that tough exterior, that you know what, it's all right, all is good in the world, everything's going to be just fine. You give the impression that all that has mattered is your money. Now,
well, let's be for real, Stephen A. Smith, for the most part, that is all that has mattered. Because he was unable to understand how successful the LeBron James, Dwayne Wade experiment was going to be down in Miami because he was supposed to have been part of it.
Now what happens? Then people go piggyback. And what do I constantly tell y'all? The big 3 was never supposed to be LeBron, D. Wade, and Bosh in Miami. It was supposed to be LeBron, D. Wade, and Melo. But Melo wanted to take the 5 years instead of the 3 years because he wanted the $80 million guaranteed at the time from Denver. Then you have an
Yes, because he thinks like a broke person. He doesn't think like a wealthy person. You don't have to be wealthy to think like one. You just have to bet on yourself and understand that the market changes every year. A lot of these players sign these long-term deals and then they get frustrated at management when they should be frustrated with themselves. That is why, once again, it is very easy to deduce that Carmelo Anthony is not a macrocosmic thinker. He's someone who just comprehends and deals with what is directly in front of him. He is a 2-dimensional thinker. And part of being a champion is about understanding in which way the winds or the tides are going to flow or blow or what have you in the years to come. LeBron James is the type to be cognizant of up-and-coming collective bargaining agreement negotiations. He's that type of person. That's why he's always able to take advantage of the marketplace. He's the type of person to invest in himself and say, I'm going to short my salary while I'm with Miami and view it as an internship where I learn how to lead and how to win. Now, there's only so much that he was able to learn because Pat Riley is someone who has a lot of masculine energy, and LeBron James, even though he's an alpha, He was clearly raised in a very chaotic environment, so there was only so much that he was able to ingest. But he did ingest enough to be able to carry that alpha male championship level persona back to Cleveland. And it resulted in a championship. It's also resulted in LeBron James being a far more dominant player in the postseason than he was even with the Miami Heat. Carmelo Anthony has missed out on all of that because he thinks it's such a low level.
Have an opportunity to be a free agent again because you ruined your chance to be a free agent in 2010. You forced yourself out of Denver. You didn't want to wait, so they had to give up a lot to get you in New York. And then you got your money then. And then now here you are in OKC, more of your money. He gives the impression, or has given the impression, of course it's about your money. It should be about your money too. But you cannot allow, you have to guard against the impression that that's all it's about.
Let me address that.
And that is why I can't stand when he gives haters this kind of ammunition to get at him, because he gave it to them on a civil.
I want to address that.
Well, the so-called haters are always going to attack and address a person like Carmelo Anthony because they see weakness. People always attack when there's weakness. Animals attack when there's weakness. Nature attacks when there's weakness. People are very rarely brazen enough to try to attack you when you're in a position of strength and they don't see any flaws to your game.
Address that. If you are a player with the refined skill of Carmelo Anthony,
right,
you had to put a lifetime of work, of dedication, of perfectionist kind of work ethic and ethos into your craft, because his game is all about craft. He doesn't jump through the gym, jump out. He's not the fastest guy up and down the floor, obviously, right? He's not playing
especially when he's trying to run back to play defense
above the rim. He's not a brilliant passer.
He's a terrible passer.
His offense, his ISO scoring offense, is pure craft. I mean, he's a big, strong guy.
That's why he would have been perfect as a third option on that Miami Heat team. But he was unable to understand that because he was more concerned with trying to show LeBron that I'm your peer, I'm on your level. And he wasn't. To a degree, I understand why Carmelo did that. Because at that point, they were all 25 years old. So they were basically battling for supremacy on the NBA battlegrounds in the 2000s. When LeBron first broached the subject, the possibility of all three of them teaming together on the Miami Heat in 2010, it was at the 2008 Olympics. And for all intents and purposes, Carmelo Anthony on the Denver Nuggets, he had a relatively good shot, if not a remotely outside shot, but a relatively good shot of getting to the NBA Finals. Please keep in mind that in the 08-09 season, the Denver Nuggets were able to advance to the Western Conference Finals. So it wasn't like he was on a team that was barely making the playoffs like Chris Bosh's teams. It's very easy to understand why Chris Bosh was able to accept the proposition from LeBron and D. Wade much more than a Carmelo Anthony was.
Guy, I get it. But he is a craftsman. So the idea that he just cares about the money or he doesn't care about this stuff, the Melo label, is ridiculous when you consider anyone at that level of practical perfection at what he does is very, very serious about his work.
Max Kellerman, it's very obvious that you're using hyperbole for Carmelo Anthony. There is no aspect of his game that I see and I think to myself, this is a person who has perfected his craft. Nothing against him. He is very, very good in a half-court set. At one time, you can make the case that he may have been the most potent half-court offensive player in the NBA. You could have made that case in the late 2000s. He and Kobe. But at no point in his career did I ever watch him play and say to myself, he's a dominant basketball player. Honestly, whenever I watched him, all I thought was that he was a black hole, which is what many of the top coaches during that time period also thought when they watched him, which is why you see it was always very common for coaches like George Karl or Phil Jackson to denigrate his style of play because they understood that he impedes their offensive flow. And championship level teams, they have to have a high level of offensive flow in order to execute in crucial moments, whether it be in the conference final round or the finals.
So I don't think the fact that he says this indicates anything about him being mellow. I think it's the opposite. I think it's a defense mechanism. When he talks about how he's got money, life is good, whatever people say,
right.
I think that's really about him saying,
yeah, but let me ask you this.
I put in a lifetime of work.
That's
the
fair.
league changed from under my feet. Somehow I can't win. So he's going to something else to protect himself.
I'm coming to you for what you said. I want to believe that. I want the world to believe that. The problem is, Mac, there are layers of times it's been the same Melo. And that's where the problem lies. In other words, if this happened, Max, over the last 2 summers, right? We don't have an issue. If it happened when you wanted out of New York and you ended up landing in OKC because you couldn't get to Houston like you really wanted to, that's not the issue here, Max. You know what the issue is? That whole stuff with Denver, when you didn't sign, I'm saying that's 2007. And then ultimately it was 2011. And then ultimately it was 2016. And now here we are in 2018. My point to you is it's spanning more than a decade where the same critique about you has been given. There's been fodder provided to it for critics to come at you. And I wish that he would guard better against that.
Well, why would he guard better against criticism when he can't even guard his man on the basketball court, Stephen A. Smith? At the end of the day, you are who you are. Carmelo is a short-sighted person, and it reflects in how he views the game. People have to grasp this. Oftentimes, a person's mental approach to a certain aspect of life is also their mental approach to other aspects of life. How someone treats their woman is oftentimes how they're going to treat their colleagues at work. It's oftentimes how they're going to treat their mother or their father. When you have a nature, whether it be generosity or understanding or what have you, it's going to tend to permeate. When you're a short-sighted person, you're going to see it in that person's work life, in their personal life, etc. And we see that with Carmelo Anthony. He likes the quick fix.
Carmelo,
that's what I wish he would do.
Carmelo at his best was either a great or very nearly great player in spite of the defensive line.
He wasn't LeBron.
No, who's LeBron?
I'm saying that was the crime.
It reminds me. This is what Carmelo's like. Remember I don't know if you remember the 1981 movie Reds, right?
I don't remember.
I think it was
that one,
Maureen
Max.
Stapleton.
I usually remember this stuff. I don't remember that one, man.
ISO scoring is like communism, Stephen A. It's failed. Yes, it's failed. It's a failed philosophy. And there was a.
In this era, it's much more difficult to be an ISO scorer in the manner that Carmelo Anthony is an ISO scorer, because he's not someone who's ever embraced elite level fitness. Beyond that, he's a terrible passer. When you look at some of the other ISO players in the NBA, whether it be LeBron, James Harden, or Russell Westbrook, they can pass. That's something that Carmelo cannot do. So he basically has marginalized himself. And as Max Kellerman has asserted, he's nowhere near as valuable in this era, where now your 4-man and your 5-man are expected to be able to stretch the floor. Back in the mid to late 2000s, Carmelo knew he could match up on the opposing team's 3-man and back him down to the basket. If he faced the opposing team's 4-man, he could take him to the cup. And that 4-man will be put in a torture chamber, because oftentimes power forwards, all the way up until the mid 2000s, were not very good shooters, and they had to stay in the paint. Same thing with your 5-man. But with the way in which the modern day NBA offense has changed, and your 4 and your 5-man, your power players, have now diversified their skill set, where does that leave Carmelo? He's not big enough to bang with the big guys. He's not a good rebounder. He's not a good passer. He's not a good defender. So what really can he do? Especially if he's not making his mid-range or his long-range jump shots. He's always been a volume shooter.
You shouldn't meet my dad. He calls everyone communist.
But there was.
Yeah, Max Kellerman should know. He's a borderline communist himself. He's a Marxist.
There was a moment in Reds, I recall, when I think it was Maureen Stapleton who said when she found out it wasn't working, said, but I can't believe it. I've given my life to this, so it can't be true. And Melo right now is at the point where the ISO scoring and the thing that makes him a good player ain't working, and he's basically saying, this can't be true.
Well, one of the main reasons why it's not working is because he's no longer as good as he once was. Once again, at his very best, Carmelo Anthony was a borderline great player. I would never have even called him a great player, because even when he was at his best in the late 2000s, I saw all the flaws in his game, and particularly in his mindset. And now that his overall physical aspect, his athleticism is starting to deteriorate, we're seeing that due to the fact that he has such an overall limited skill set, he's pretty much not useful on the basketball floor. So we all knew that he was going to opt in. He better have opted in, because on the open market, there was no way that any wise team, any team that's well run, was going to give him even half the amount of money that the Thunder were going to give him for this up and coming season. Especially with the prospect of Paul George potentially going to the LA Lakers, which I believe he's going to do.
And so the way he defends himself is just by saying, hey, everything's okay, I got money, everyone calm down.
You know who's stealing the show right now?
1981.
His wife, Lala Power's about to be back. Can't wait for that.
Ah!
Right?
Ah!
Is Lala still his wife? Is she what constitutes a quote-unquote wife in this day and age? Some 40-year-old broad walking down the street having paparazzi take pictures of her with outfits on that are 2 sizes too small, with all types of back fat coming out of the top of her pants and the bottom of her shirt, looking like a stuffed sausage, trying to see how many 25 and 30-year-old guys she can get to hit on her at the club so that she can still feel relevant. If that's a wife, then we have an issue with what constitutes a wife. But anyway, back to Carmelo Anthony. It's very obvious that there is a light at the end of the tunnel approaching Carmelo Anthony very rapidly, and he will not be able to get out of the way of that oncoming train. I predict that there will be a huge train wreck in Oklahoma City this year. So peace.